in Europe in recent months. We all recognise the monumental naivety displayed by Chancellor Merkel in throwing open the borders of the EU to everyone claiming to be a refugee. Naivety is too kind a word. Perhaps stupidity would be more accurate. None of us are without sympathy for those genuinely forced from their homes by war. None of us fail to feel pity for the families ripped apart and their lives destroyed. None of us would turn our backs on those most in need, those who are genuine refugees. The problem is the definition of who has become a refugee, and the definition is ludicrously broad. Those looking for better work prospects, better education, services, better health, and indeed benefits which actually genuine refugees are looking for. But these are not genuine refugees, these are economic migrants. Yet they have been included alongside those who are genuinely and legitimately fleeing their homes in fear of their lives. The Geneva Convention clearly defines who qualifies as a refugee. It states such a person must be unable or unwilling to stay in a country due for fear of persecution. It is how the United Nations defines who qualifies for help. However, the EU's qualification directive goes way beyond this definition to include those who under no immediate threat of persecution. This essentially throws open the continent to migration from potentially millions of people, almost all of whom are not refugees, according to the United Nations, but are economic migrants. More than 1 million people have arrived in the EU last year, and at least as many are expected in 2016. Many of those people come from parts of the world with different values to those of Europe, different standards of acceptable behaviour towards women. And different beliefs of freedom of expression and religion, which has already led to the effective genocide of Christian communities in the Middle East. Now, believe it or not, the EU has finally acknowledged this is happening. And they are arriving, these people, in huge, unsustainable numbers. Germany is already facing repercussions of Chancellor Merkel's open invitation to all comers. A mob of more than 1,000 men, mostly of immigrant backgrounds, gathered in Cologne on New Year's Eve and subjected hundreds of women to atrocious levels of harassment and outright sexual assault. Of course, the EU is denying that there are any links between migration and what happened not only in Cologne, but in Hamburg, Helsinki, and other cities across the European Union.
Send Merkel to Cologne, let her get her. Probably wouldn't want her.
Probably not. Let me ask you this. If it was your mother, your daughter, your friend, would you still deny anything had happened?
I would go bananas.
This is what happens when you open the door to countries and cultures that treat women as second-class citizens. Then we have the attempted cover-ups by the police, the politicians, and the press. To hear Swedish police say they won't report what happened because it might benefit some political parties, for German politicians to say women should act differently in public, well, that's a total disgrace. The people we vote for and the authorities we expect to protect our safety are cynically turning their backs on ordinary women and men because of political correctness. And what happens when the people who have committed these crimes are given nationality from EU countries? They will have the right to come to Britain without any criminal check backgrounds at all. In 2015, 100,000 illegal migrants were stopped trying to enter the UK. This shows the scale of the problem heading towards Britain. But what happens if we look at the other side of this crisis? More than 10,000 migrant children are missing. Europol has said that these children and young people are being forced into sexual exploitation and slavery by criminal gangs. The International Organization for Migration said it was to be expected that many of these would be caught up in exploitation. And that is without a mention of the thousands of dead or missing in the Mediterranean. So not only are these EU policies putting women under threat at home, but also having horrendous consequences for women and children trying to seek safety. Many of those trying to get to the EU are turning to criminal gangs to get here. And EU free movement rules allow them to be trafficked all across Europe. And because there are no border controls or criminal background checks between any country whatsoever, free movement is a huge security risk which was exploited in the Paris terrorist attack. Weapons, criminals, terrorists can move freely around Europe and attack public places, all thanks to the European Union. The EU is putting women at direct risk, and clearly it cannot cope with this crisis. So, for the safety of our own women and men, for the sake of innocent victims from other countries, we have to get control of our borders. And ladies and gentlemen, we have to leave the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a short film which we're now about to show you before my colleague Jane takes the podium.